Welcome to the Feminist Park podcast. I'm Kwame.
And I'm Leilani. It's great to be kicking off this journey with you all today.
Yeah, we're diving into work that's really closely tied to the vision behind the Feminist Park project.
Imagining these truly equitable public spaces, starting with the idea for an intersectional feminist park right here in Berlin.
Exactly. And this podcast, well, it's kind of an extension of that. We're going to be digging into the academic research that, supports and informs that kind of vision.
We'll be taking these dense, sometimes quite academic papers and really pulling out the core and insights.
And looking at them through specific lenses, things like environmental justice, intersectionality, anti-colonial thought, queer theory.
All the stuff that helps us think critically about space.
If you look down at a standard sidewalk tree bed.
Right, just that little cutout in the concrete.
Exactly. Like if you're walking in New York City and you look at that tiny patch of dirt where the street tree grows, you'll typically find, maybe 2 plant species just sort of eking out in existence.
Yeah, usually tough weed and maybe some moss, if you're lucky.
Right. And if you look at one in Paris, maybe you find 3 or 4. But if you walk down the street in Freiburg, Germany, and you look at that exact same size patch of dirt, you will find an average of 15 different plant species.
All just thriving in a single square meter.
15. I mean, that's just mind-blowing to me.
We aren't just talking about, a slightly greener patch of grass here.
No?
We are talking about a fundamental difference in how a city actually functions on a biological level.
Yeah.
Because that discrepancy between 2 species and 15 species, that's the footprint of this massive, hidden ecological battle happening in the tiny squares of dirt that you and I just step over every single day.
And today, we're jumping right into the middle of that battle. We're going to explore how ordinary people, just regular folks, armed with nothing more than a watering can and a garden trowel, are literally transforming the biological makeup of entire cities.
It's honestly one of the most fascinating urban ecology stories I've read in a long time.
Same here. To do this, we are doing a deep dive into a 2026 peer-reviewed article from the Journal of Urban Ecology. It's titled, Citizen Stewardship of Street Tree Beds Promotes Urban Biodiversity.
Authored by Kelly Baldwin Hyde and this amazing global team of researchers.
Yeah. And, whether you're an urban planner trying to figure out how to design more resilient cities, or you just want to know if putting some marigolds around your neighborhood street tree actually does anything, you're going to want to hear this.
Absolutely. Because it takes this rigorous, hyper-controlled lens of hard ecological science and just points it at something incredibly mundane.
Right. They didn't go trek into the Amazon rainforest.
No. They went to the curb right outside your apartment building.
Which is wild. But I think we need to set the baseline first. Why are ecologists suddenly looking down at the sidewalk instead of out at vast, protected national parks?
Right.
What is the specific crisis that's driving this research right now?
Well, the crisis is twofold, really. And the paper establishes this grim reality right in the introduction. First, we are living through what scientists classify as a 6th mass extinction.
Which sounds terrifying.
It is. I mean, since the dawn of the 20th century, global biodiversity has been plummeting at a rate we literally haven't seen in millions of years. We're losing species of plants, insects, animals, just at a staggering pace.
And then the second part of that crisis is demographic, right? Human demographics. We are moving into cities faster than ever before.
Exactly. We are a rapidly urbanizing species. The paper highlights that by the year 2050, over 70% of the world's population will live in urban areas.
70%. Wow. I mean, when you think about the infrastructure required to support that many people in concentrated areas, you realize the physical landscape of the planet is just being fundamentally rewritten. It isn't just about building taller apartment buildings.
Oh, not at all. It is about what urban expansion does to the ground itself. The technical term they use in the paper is surface sealing.
Surface sealing? Sounds like, a sterile bureaucratic phrase.
It does, yeah. But the reality of it is brutal. Surface sealing means we are literally paving over the permeable earth with completely impermeable concrete, asphalt, paving stones.
Right, we're basically capping the soil, putting a lid on the earth.
That is exactly what it is. And when you put a lid on the earth, you disrupt, everything. The rain can no longer penetrate the soil to recharge underground aquifers.
Right, it just bounces off.
Exactly. And instead, it becomes this toxic runoff that floods the sewer systems. Plus, the pavement absorbs solar radiation all day and then radiates it back out all night.
Which creates that urban heat island effect we always hear about.
You got it. And because the rain can't get in, You get severe localized drought conditions. The soil underneath the pavement is just bone dry. Add in the heavy metal pollution from car exhaust and tire wear settling on every single surface.
So the city essentially becomes this giant thermal oven that also happens to be laced with pollutants.
That is the perfect way to describe it. It's a thermal oven. And all of those factors combined essentially decimate plant species.
Which I think we tend to frame as just an aesthetic problem, right? Like, oh, we miss having pretty flowers or green leaves to look at on our walk to work.
Right. We think of it as a landscaping issue. But this paper really emphasizes that it's actually a fundamental collapse of ecosystem functions.
Because plants aren't just decorations. I mean, they are functional infrastructure.
They are the engine of the local ecosystem. We rely on these biological networks for water filtration. I mean, plant roots hold the soil together. They actually filter toxins out of the water before it hits the water table. Yeah. And the leaves capture particulate matter from the air, which cleans the smog. And transpiration from plant leaves actively cools the ambient air, which mitigates that heat island effect.
So when you pave over the plants, you just lose all those free essential services overnight.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. If the modern city is basically an expanding, hostile desert of concrete, these little street tree beds, those like 3 by 3 foot cutouts on the sidewalk, they are essentially micro oases.
They really are. They are often the only places left where the lid is actually taken off the earth.
Right.
The researchers actually call them underutilized green infrastructure.
Which is funny because usually when city planners talk about green infrastructure, they mean like $1 million mega project.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
A sprawling new botanical garden or some massive municipal park or a highly engineered green roof on a corporate skyscraper. But this paper argues that the road medians, the grassy verges, and especially those little cutouts in the pavement for trees, those are the real frontier. They are interstitial spaces. They branch out like capillaries through the entire concrete network of the city.
I love that image. But, acknowledging that the city is hostile and acknowledging that these little patches of dirt exist, that's really only step one.
Right.
Because how do you actually test if human intervention in these tiny spaces does any good? I mean, science requires controlled variables. You can't just walk around a chaotic city, look at a few random trees, and draw a meaningful conclusion.
Which brings us directly to their methodology and why they chose Freiburg, Germany as their laboratory.
All right, let's talk about Freiburg.
So Freiburg is a city of about 230,000 people. It's down the southwest corner of the country. And it already has a reputation for being exceptionally green. Like about 42% of the city is covered by tree canopy.
That's a lot of trees.
It is. But the real reason it's the absolute ideal testing ground for this study is a municipal program they have been running since 2003.
Right. It's called Freiburg Packed On, right?
Yeah.
Which I think roughly translates to Freiburg Tackles the Challenge.
That's the one. It's this highly organized citizen engagement initiative. Basically, residents can officially register with the city to care for public spaces.
Like adopting a highway, but for a sidewalk?
Basically. And one of the most popular options within this program is taking stewardship of the tree bed right in front of your home or your business.
Okay, just to clarify the division of labor here, because this is important. The city still owns the actual tree, right?
Oh, yes. The municipality handles all the heavy arboriculture. They plant the sapling, they do the heavy watering, they prune the massive branches.
So the citizens are just, like, taking over that little square of exposed dirt at the base of the trunk.
Correct. The citizens are basically given official permission to be the stewards of the understory, the soil and whatever grows in it. And this program has been wildly successful. Currently, there are over 700 of these officially registered citizen-stewarded tree beds scattered all across Freiburg.
Okay, I want to pause here and look at this critically, because you have an army of civic-minded people, sure, but these are amateurs, right?
Right.
They aren't botanists. They are just regular folks who probably went to the local hardware store, bought whatever petunias or geraniums were on sale, and just fiddled around in the dirt on a Sunday afternoon.
Exactly.
So how scientific can a study really be when your primary variable is just random neighbors planting whatever they feel like? Like, does that actually qualify as rigorous ecology?
See, that is the central tension of modern urban ecology. It is inherently messy. You can no longer separate the human from the habitat.
Because we are the habitat.
Exactly. We are the apex species shaping these environments.
Yeah.
So our random aesthetic choices, like buying petunias on sale at the hardware store, those are the actual ecological drivers now.
Wow.
But to your point about scientific rigor, the researchers knew they had a messy variable, so they compensated for that human chaos with incredibly strict methodological controls.
Okay, walk me through that. Because a city street is so chaotic, how do you control for all that noise?
So between June and September of 2023, the research team conducted a highly controlled survey. They didn't just walk around and look at all 700 beds.
Right.
They spent weeks isolating exactly 100 perfectly matched pairs of tree beds. That's 200 beds in total, analyzed side by side.
Wait, what qualifies as a perfectly matched pair in an environment as random as a city?
Oh, the constraints are brutal.
Yeah.
To make a pair, they had to find one stewarded bed, one actively cared for by a citizen, and pair it with a neglected, non-stewarded bed.
Okay.
But to make the pair valid, both beds had to be on the exact same street.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they had to be on the exact same side of the street to ensure identical sun exposure and shadow patterns from buildings. They had to be within 100 meters of each other.
Okay, so the microclimate is essentially identical for both patches of dirt.
Completely identical. But they went further. The beds had to contain the exact same species of tree.
Makes sense.
And not just the same species, but the tree had to be roughly the exact same age and size. They measured this using a metric called DBH, which stands for diameter at breast height.
Wait, why does the size of the tree trunk matter to the little plants growing in the dirt below?
Because a massive old oak tree has a massive old root system that completely dominates the soil beneath it. It sucks up all the water and creates heavy shade.
Oh, right.
Whereas a young, thin sapling leaves a lot more resources in the soil for smaller plants. If you compared a stewarded bed under a sapling to a neglected bed under a giant oak tree, the data would be totally useless. The competition for water is just too different.
That makes perfect sense. By matching the DBH, they ensured the underground resource competition was identical.
Exactly.
I mean, that level of detail is intense. They are systematically stripping away every single environmental variable. The rainfall is the same, the sunlight is the same, the soil type is the same, even the amount of toxic exhaust from cars driving by is the same.
Yep. The only difference left, the single variable, is that a human hand touched one patch of dirt and totally ignored the other.
That is brilliant design. And once they isolated those pairs, the actual fieldwork was pretty exhaustive.
Oh, it was meticulous. They didn't just casually count the flowers. They identified and measured every single vascular plant species in all 200 beds.
Okay, let's define vascular plant really quickly because the paper uses that term heavily. What makes a plant vascular, and why are we explicitly excluding the others?
Sure. So vascular plants are essentially any plant that has specialized tissues called xylem and phloem for transporting water, minerals, and sugars throughout the plant.
It's like a circulatory system for the plant.
Exactly like a circulatory system. This includes trees, shrubs, grasses, ferns, flowering plants. They intentionally excluded non-vascular plants, things like mosses, liverworts, algae.
Why exclude them?
Because those organisms interact with the environment in a totally different way. They absorb water directly through their surface. They don't rely on root systems penetrating the soil to fight for resources.
Got it. So they are strictly looking at the plants with roots, fighting it out in the dirt.
Right. And they didn't stop at just identifying them. They mapped the entire microgeography of each bed. They estimated the percentage of ground coverage for each species. They measured the exact square footage of the exposed soil.
They really didn't miss a detail.
They even pulled high-resolution spatial data from the European Environment Agency to calculate the precise percentage of sealed concrete within a 15-meter radius of every single bed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they basically created a localized urbanization index for each specific patch of dirt.
So we are looking at hardcore quantified data here. We are comparing a patch of dirt humans interacted with to a patch of dirt 100 meters away that humans ignored, with all other factors completely neutralized.
Yes.
Let's get to the results, because the numbers here are what make this study so important. The plant counts are just staggering.
They really are. Across those 200 tiny street patches, the researchers recorded 474 unique vascular plant species.
474 unique species.
In squares of dirt surrounded by concrete that feels impossibly high. Wait, I'm picturing my own street right now. If I walk down my block, I might see the exact same 3 weeds repeated endlessly. Where are all these different species even coming from?
I know. The sheer variety is the first major shock. On average, a single tree bed hosted 15 different species.
Incredible.
But the real narrative, the most important part, is hidden in what they call the treatment effect. That's the statistical difference between the beds humans cared for and the ones they neglected. The data revealed that stewarded beds had 1.6 times higher plant species richness than the non-stewarded beds.
A 1.6 times multiplier. That is a massive jump in biodiversity. Now, I have to play the skeptic again here.
Please do.
If I go to the garden center and I buy a tray of 6 different exotic succulents and I plant them around my street tree, I just artificially inflated the biodiversity of that bed by 6.
Right.
Isn't that 1.6 multiplier just a reflection of people literally buying plants and shoving them into the dirt? Like, are we just measuring the local garden center's inventory? That is a very sharp observation, and honestly, it's exactly what the researchers initially assumed was happening.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it is partly true. The stewarded beds absolutely contained a much higher number of non-native species, precisely because citizens were buying exotic garden varieties, your typical ornamental flowers, and planting them.
Makes sense.
However, the researchers uncovered a second layer to the data that is arguably the most crucial finding in the entire paper.
What was it?
Native species richness. The local wild plants that absolutely nobody bought at a store was also significantly higher in the stewarded beds.
Wait, I want to make sure I'm getting this right. By planting non-native plants from a hardware store, the citizens somehow got more wild native plants to grow.
Yes, exactly that. The statistical models showed a strong positive correlation between the number of non-native plants and the number of native plants.
That is wild.
As the count of introduced garden plants went up, the count of spontaneous local plants went up right alongside them.
Okay, it's like throwing a dinner party. You invite your friends. Those are the non-native garden plants you intentionally bought and put there. You set the table, you put out great food, you make the environment really pleasant.
I love this analogy.
Right. And because the party looks so inviting, the cool local neighbors, the native seeds, they just show up uninvited, crash the party, and end up staying.
That is brilliant. Let's look at the actual physical mechanism of that dinner party, because it comes down to the physics of urban soil.
Okay.
When we talk about a neglected tree bed, we aren't talking about nice, loamy forest soil. We are talking about urban dirt that has been compacted by years of foot traffic, baked by the intense sun, and totally deprived of organic matter. It becomes hydrophobic.
Meaning it literally repels water.
Yes. If you pour water on highly compacted, dry, urban soil, the water doesn't soak in at all. It pools on the surface and just runs off into the gutter.
Right. I've seen that happen when watering a dry houseplant.
Exactly the same principle. The soil density on the street is so high that tiny wind-blown native seeds simply cannot penetrate the surface to establish their roots.
So what happens when the citizen steward arrives on the scene?
Think about the physical actions of gardening. The steward takes a trowel and actively breaks up that hard-packed crust.
Yeah.
They're aerating the soil.
Oh, they're breaking the seal.
Yes, they're adding potting mix or compost, which introduces crucial organic matter. They are watering the bed consistently during dry spells. They're pulling out trash and dog waste.
And they are doing all this selfishly, right? Just to help their chosen exotic roses or lavender survive.
Completely selfishly. But in doing so, they drastically change the percolation rate of the soil. They change the temperature. They inadvertently create a welcoming, fertile microhabitat.
The perfect landing pad.
Exactly. A landing pad for what ecologists call ruderal species.
Ruderal species. I haven't heard that term before. What does that mean?
It comes from the Latin word for rubble.
Oh.
Yeah, ruderal species are the pioneer plants. They're the very first to colonize disturbed lands, construction sites, and harsh urban environments. They usually have tiny seeds that blow easily on the wind.
Like dandelions.
Exactly like dandelions.
Sure.
These native ruderal seeds are floating through the air of the city constantly. But 99% of the time, they hit that hard, hydrophobic crust of a neglected tree bed, and they just desiccate and die.
But when they land in a stewarded bed...
When they land in a stewarded bed, the soil is actually soft enough for their microscopic roots to penetrate. There is moisture trapped by the mulch or the loosened dirt. There is a microclimate created by the shade of the planted garden flowers, which protects the tiny sprouts from the harsh afternoon sun.
So they establish themselves completely spontaneously.
Yes. The humans didn't plant the natives, they just engineered the physical conditions that allowed the natives to finally thrive alongside the non-natives.
That completely changes how I look at gardening in the city. You aren't just planting a flower, you are literally terraforming a tiny patch of land.
Terraforming is the perfect word for it.
So who exactly is showing up to this terraformed patch? Because The paper dives into the specific plant roster, right? They list out what thrives where.
They did. They performed a very specific statistical check called an indicator species analysis.
Okay.
Instead of just listing all 474 plants in a giant spreadsheet, this analysis mathematically isolates the plants that are strongly predictably associated with one specific environment over the other.
Right. So what defines a stewarded bed versus a neglected one? And the paper notes that the top indicator species for the stewarded beds, the ones cared for by humans, are things like lavender, periwinkle, roses, columbine, and geraniums.
Which are very classic, beautiful garden plants. They're mostly non-native ornamentals.
Right. And then look at the non-stewarded beds, the neglected patches just 100 meters away.
The neglected beds were dominated by just 4 incredibly tough, stubborn weed and grass species, things like wall barley and perennial ryegrass.
Let's talk about wall barley for a second, because if it's dominating those neglected beds, it must be practically indestructible.
It really is worth exploring the biology of something like wall barley. Why does it dominate? Because it has evolved to tolerate extreme salt stress.
Salt from winter roads.
From winter road salt, yes, and also highly concentrated dog urine. It can survive in heavily compacted soil where oxygen levels at the root zone are almost zero. It doesn't need humans at all.
But there's a trade-off for that toughness.
Big time. The trade-off for that extreme toughness is that it often forms a complete monoculture, just crowding out anything slightly more delicate that tries to grow there.
But the paper explicitly notes that the stewarded beds still had a baseline of urban flora, right? Like the humans didn't completely eradicate the tough native stuff.
No, and that's a vital point. The stewarded beds didn't lose the hardy native plants.
Yeah.
You still found dandelions, native clovers, and ivy in the cared-for beds.
So the human stewardship didn't replace the baseline nature.
Not at all. It layered a massive diversity of cultivated plants on top of that baseline, creating this much richer, multi-tiered botanical tapestry.
I really want to challenge this, though, based on the text.
Sure.
If citizens are actively planting all these non-native ornamentals, the lavender, the exotic irises, the roses, aren't we just building a launch pad for invasive species?
The invasive debate.
Right, because almost every conservation group right now has a massive campaign pushing people to plant native. If you plant a non-native vine in a public space, aren't you risking unleashing the next kudzu or English ivy that eventually escapes the bed and chokes out a whole local park?
It's a huge concern.
Shouldn't municipal policy strictly mandate native species in these street beds?
You're hitting on literally one of the most fiercely debated topics in modern urban ecology right now. And the authors of this paper navigated very carefully. It is a highly nuanced argument.
What's their take?
On one side, the risk you just mentioned is entirely real. Non-native plants are a double-edged sword. Some introduced species definitely become invasive, they outcompete local flora, they disrupt the local food web, and they cause massive ecological damage. The paper explicitly acknowledges that introducing exotics carries an inherent risk.
So why tolerate it? If there's a risk, why let people plant whatever they want?
Because of the context of the Anthropocene, we have to be realistic about where we are planting. We are not talking about a pristine woodland or a beautifully restored natural prairie. We are talking about a 3-foot square of toxic dirt surrounded by moving cars and concrete. The paper introduces this concept of novel ecosystems.
Novel ecosystems, meaning totally new.
Meaning environments so heavily altered by human activity that they no longer resemble any historical natural state whatsoever.
Oh, I see. The city is essentially an alien planet compared to the forest that used to be there hundreds of years ago.
Precisely. The environmental pressures are entirely artificial now. Radiant heat from the asphalt baking the air, heavy metals in the soil from tires, constant physical trampling from pedestrians, highly altered hydrology.
So native plants might not even survive.
That's exactly the issue. In these extreme novel conditions, many native plant species, the delicate woodland flowers or meadow grasses that historically belong in that geographic region, they will simply wither and die. They never evolved to survive on a hot sidewalk.
Right, a delicate native fern is just going to fry on a concrete corner in August.
Yes, so pushing strict native purity might actually result in a completely dead tree dead.
So a tough, non-native plant from a similar climate zone might be the only thing actually capable of surviving the heat and the salt.
Exactly. And if it survives, it performs those ecosystem services we talked about. It provides a physical canopy that cools the soil. Its roots break up the compaction. It might offer crucial nectar for urban adaptive pollinators when literally nothing else is blooming on the street.
Okay, so the authors are making a pragmatic argument over an ideological one.
Yes. They argue that in the hostile urban matrix, functional biodiversity, meaning having plants that can actually survive, filter water, and support insect life, sometimes has to take precedence over strict native purity.
Wow.
Yeah, the net result observed in Freiburg was that allowing non-natives vastly increased the total biodiversity, creating a highly functional, if technically novel, ecosystem.
That makes a lot of sense. You really have to design for the environment you actually have, not the one you wish you had.
Exactly.
So the plants are surviving, they are altering the soil, they are inviting native species to the party, but we have to address the physical reality of the space itself
Right.
because they are still trapped in a tiny box.
Right, the concrete border.
A square meter is still just a square meter. How do the physical dimensions of the street actually limit this explosion of life?
Well, this is where the study transitions from pure botany into spatial ecology. The researchers didn't just measure the plants. They measured the physical architecture of the street itself to see what structural factors dictated life and death in these beds.
And they ran all these variables, the human stewardship, the tree trunk size, the size of the dirt patch, the amount of concrete in the neighborhood, through some pretty heavy statistical models, right? The paper mentions NMDS and Permanova.
Oh, yes. The heavy machinery of ecology stats.
Okay, let's demystify those acronyms, because when I read them, my eyes kind of glazed over.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So NMDS stands for non-metric multidimensional scaling. And Permanova is permutational multivariate analysis of variance.
Okay, I asked you to demystify, and you just gave me more syllables.
I know, they sound awful. Let's build an analogy here.
Please. What are these models actually doing with all this data?
Imagine you have 200 totally different recipes for soup. These represent our 200 tree beds.
Okay, I like soup.
Each soup has a completely different combination of ingredients. Those are our 474 plant species. Some soups have carrots and onions, some have chicken and rice, some have weird ingredients like mango and chili. If I ask you, which of these 200 soups are the most similar to each other? It's really hard to tell just by staring at a giant spreadsheet of ingredients.
Right, the data is just too complex to eyeball.
Exactly. So an NMDS model is basically like a supercomputer that tastes all 200 soups and then plots them on a massive 3D map. It takes the soups that taste similar and physically groups them together in one corner of the map and pushes the totally different tasting soups far away to the opposite corner.
Oh, that's clever. It maps out the relationships visually based on the ingredients.
Exactly. It visually separates the plant communities based on how similar their makeup is.
Yeah.
And then the Permanova is the statistical test that looks at that final map and says, I see why all these soups over here in this corner are similar. It's because they all use human stewardship as a base broth.
So it separates the meaningful variables driving the ecosystem from all the random statistical noise.
Perfectly stated, yes.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So when they mapped out all 200 tree beds and ran this Permanova, what structural factors actually mattered?
The results were pretty stark. We already know human stewardship was the dominant factor, completely altering the plant community. But when looking at the physical constraints, the size of the tree bed itself was the only other variable that significantly influenced species richness.
Okay, a bigger patch of dirt holds more plants. On one level, that sounds incredibly obvious.
It does.
But there is a deeper ecological principle at work here, isn't there?
Yes, there is. Urban ecologists use this foundational framework called the theory of island biogeography.
Island biogeography.
Yeah, it was developed back in the 1960s by two famous ecologists, E.O. Wilson and Robert MacArthur. Originally, it was used to explain why some actual physical islands out in the ocean have lots of animals and other islands have very few.
What are the main rules of that theory?
It generally dictates that the number of species on an island is determined by two main factors: its size and its distance from the mainland.
Okay.
A massive island very close to a continent will have high biodiversity because it's an easy target for migrating animals and has plenty of room for them to live.
Like Madagascar, maybe.
Exactly. But a tiny rock way out in the middle of the Pacific will have very low biodiversity. It's hard to find, and once you get there, the resources are incredibly scarce, so the local extinction rate is super high.
So we're basically mapping a 1960s oceanic theory onto a modern sidewalk. The tree bed is the island, and the pavement is the ocean.
It maps perfectly. A tree bed is literally an island of permeable soil in an ocean of lethal asphalt. If the tree bed is physically larger, it acts as a larger island.
But wait, on the scale of a sidewalk, how does a few extra square feet really change the survival rate of a plant?
It creates microhabitats.
Microhabitats.
Yeah. In a tiny 3 by 3 bed, the whole area might get absolutely baked by the sun at noon. It's just one uniform zone of heat. But in a slightly larger bed, maybe one corner is permanently shaded by the trunk of the tree.
Oh, creating a cool, damp zone for shade-loving plants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe another corner gets blasted by the afternoon sun, which is perfect for the lavender.
Hmm.
A larger bed simply holds more total water volume in the soil. Because it has more varied conditions, it can support a larger, more diverse population of plants.
Which mathematically lowers the chance that any single species will just die out entirely.
Exactly. It lowers the extinction rate on that specific island.
That makes total logical sense. But here's the data point that completely threw me when I was reading the Permanova results in the paper.
Uh-oh.
The researchers meticulously measured the DBH, the size of the tree trunk, and they used that high-res satellite data to calculate the exact percentage of sealed pavement within a 15-meter radius. They tracked all the surrounding concrete,
Right.
and the statistical model showed that neither the size of the tree nor the amount of surrounding concrete had any significant influence on species richness.
I know it is wildly counterintuitive.
It really is. You would logically assume that a tree bed surrounded by 90% concrete, sitting in some heavy industrial zone, would have a much harder time supporting life than a tree bed in a leafy residential neighborhood with only 40% concrete.
Oh, absolutely. You'd think the heat radiating off that 90% concrete would just fry everything instantly.
But the data says otherwise.
It does.
So I have to ask, does this mean the concrete doesn't matter? Like, can urban developers just pave the entire world as long as they leave a 3 by 3 square of dirt every block?
No, no, no.
Yeah.
It absolutely does not mean the concrete is harmless. What this specific finding reveals is the sheer overriding power of human intervention.
Wow, really?
Yes, the environment is hostile, there's no denying that. But human stewardship, the act of watering, aerating, and tending to that dirt, is so intensely potent that it effectively cancels out the negative effects of the surrounding urbanization.
That is incredible. Human care acts as a literal shield against the concrete.
It does. A well-tended, tiny patch of dirt can defy the sterile desert around it entirely because a human is artificially sustaining it.
That's a really powerful thought.
Furthermore, the researchers emphasize that we shouldn't look at these beds in total isolation. If we zoom out to the macro level, these individual islands interact. They function as stepping stones.
Stepping stones across the asphalt ocean.
Exactly. Think about a native bee or a migrating butterfly. They cannot fly for miles over hot, barren pavement without food or rest. They will literally drop dead.
Right.
But if you have a network of these stewarded tree beds scattered every 50 feet down a neighborhood street, you've created a connected ecological corridor. The insect can hop from bed to bed, finding nectar, finding shelter, finding water.
So by acting as stepping stones, these tiny isolated beds actually mitigate the isolation of the urban islands and weave a much larger ecosystem back together.
That is exactly the goal of urban ecology.
Okay, so it is abundantly clear from the data that Freiburg has figured something out. They have built these high-functioning stepping stones. But the paper doesn't just pat Freiburg on the back, it compares their results to other major cities around the world.
Yes, the global comparison.
And the variance in those numbers is, well, it's almost hard to believe. Let's talk about what we can call the Freiburg anomaly.
The cross-city comparisons are where the paper really shifts from biology into sociology. The differences are staggering, and they require some deep analysis to untangle.
I want to read the statistics straight from the text so we really understand the scale of the anomaly here. In Freiburg, the researchers found an average of 0.46 species per square meter of tree bed space.
Okay.
Now let's look at Oulu, Finland. In Oulu, they found 0.12 species per square meter. Yokohama, Japan had 0.21. In Paris, an average street tree bed had about 3.5 species total. In New York City, it was 2.4 species.
And in Freiburg overall?
The average in Freiburg was 15. I mean, we are talking about Freiburg outperforming New York City by a factor of 6 and outperforming Oulu by an astronomical margin. How is this even possible? Are the people in Freiburg just biologically superior gardeners?
The authors offer several hypotheses to unpack this, and they actually start with the physical realities before getting into the human element.
Okay, what's the physical factor?
The first factor is simply geography and climate. Freiburg is situated in a temperate region of Germany with a relatively long, warm growing season.
Right.
When you compare that to a city like Oulu, Finland, which is situated much, much further north. The latitude alone dictates a shorter growing season, colder average soil temperatures, and just naturally a smaller regional pool of potential plant species.
Right. I mean, you can't fight winter. The baseline potential is just lower in Finland.
Precisely. You're starting with a smaller deck of cards. The second major physical factor is density and urbanization pressure.
How does density change the math?
Well, Freiburg is a medium-sized city. Paris and New York City are hyper-dense, hyper-trafficked megacities. The ecological pressure in Manhattan. Think about the constant heavy foot traffic trampling the beds, the sheer volume of concentrated vehicle exhaust, the shadows cast by massive skyscrapers blocking the sun, the intense road salt in winter.
Yeah, the baseline stress in New York makes survival inherently harder for any plant.
Exactly. The environmental load is exponentially higher than the pressure in a quiet residential street in Freiburg.
But the paper argues it's more than just better weather and fewer skyscrapers, right? There is a real cultural and sociological momentum at play.
Absolutely. The Freiburg Pactet program has been running continuously for over 2 decades now. They have established a generational culture of civic stewardship. People see their neighbors doing it, so they do it too.
It's normalized.
Very normalized. But to fully explain the variance globally, the paper introduces 2 fascinating sociological concepts that deeply influence urban ecology and really tie into issues of class and economics.
This is where it gets really interesting to me. The intersection of plants and class.
Exactly. The concepts are the luxury effect and the legacy effect.
Let's break those down. Because the luxury effect sounds like something you'd hear in a real estate analysis, not a botany paper.
It's deeply tied to real estate and economics.
Yeah.
The luxury effect is a well-documented phenomenon in urban ecology, where wealthier, higher-income neighborhoods consistently support much greater biodiversity than lower-income neighborhoods.
I want to push on that. Why does a high-income neighborhood naturally have more plant species? Is it really just because they have a bigger budget for the city parks department?
It's multifaceted. Yes, wealthier areas often command more municipal funding for public planting and street maintenance. Political sway plays a part, but it's also heavily about private land acting as a reservoir.
How so?
Wealthier neighborhoods typically have larger private yards and larger private gardens. Those private gardens are filled with diverse, expensive ornamental plants, and they act as a massive seed bank. The wind simply catches the seeds from the private mansions and blows them right out into the public street tree beds.
So the wealth of the private space literally spills over to subsidize the biodiversity of the public space.
Exactly. The private wealth alters the public ecology. Furthermore, we have to look at the resource of time, which is a massive privilege.
Right. Time poverty.
Yes.
Yeah.
Residents in affluent neighborhoods perhaps have more leisure time, more disposable income to spend on gardening supplies, and more stable housing situations that allow them to invest long-term effort into stewarding a patch of public dirt.
Whereas in lower income areas, residents might be dealing with severe housing insecurity
Right.
or working multiple jobs just to survive.
Exactly. Leaving far less time, energy, or money for unpaid civic landscaping on the sidewalk.
So wealth literally correlates with a wider variety of plants. It changes the physical, biological makeup of the block. What about the legacy effect? How is that different from the luxury effect?
The legacy effect shifts the focus from current wealth to historical time. It refers to the timeline of a neighborhood's development. Ecologists have found that older neighborhoods with long-term historical landscaping practices have much more established vegetation than newer developments, regardless of current wealth.
How does history change the dirt today? Like, physically?
If a street was laid out 50 or 100 years ago and has been continuously planted and tended to over decades, the soil structure itself fundamentally changes. The soil microbiome, the bacteria, and the fungi is much, much richer. Decades of falling leaves and decomposed mulch have built up dense organic matter.
Right.
And most importantly, the seed bank dormant deep in the dirt is incredibly deep and diverse. It holds a century of biological memory.
So if you go to a brand new, incredibly wealthy subdivision that was just a paved parking lot 10 years ago.
Even if the residents are billionaires, that new subdivision is starting from ecological zero. The soil is likely still heavily disturbed and compacted from recent construction. That deep historical seed bank simply doesn't exist yet.
The legacy effect shows us that biodiversity compounds over time, like interest.
Exactly like interest.
That is a really profound insight. When you look at the plants on a street corner, you aren't just looking at biology and sunlight. You are looking at a physical reflection of human history, economics, and class.
You really are.
The legacy of zoning laws or historical wealth is physically legible in the types of weeds capable of growing on the curb.
The landscape is a mirror of our societal structures. It reflects our historical priorities.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most vital question of this entire study. We've talked about the plants, the insects, the soil physics, and the socioeconomics.
Right.
But what about the human mind? Why do we as a society actually care so much about these tiny little gardens? What does kneeling in the dirt on a busy, noisy street actually do to the person holding the trowel? And what does it do to the people walking past them?
This is the section of the paper where the researchers pivot beautifully from pure botany into the realm of environmental psychology and public health. They argue that the benefits of citizen stewardship aren't just for the bees, the butterflies, and the ruderal seeds. The benefits are profoundly psychological for the humans involved.
How so?
The literature strongly suggests that engaging in this kind of daily, highly accessible, nature-based activity measurably improves human well-being.
I mean, it's therapeutic, right? Getting your hands in the dirt lowers stress.
It literally lowers cortisol levels. It provides light, accessible physical exercise. It offers a sense of agency and control in an otherwise chaotic, often overwhelming urban environment.
Yeah.
But the authors highlight that the impact goes far beyond just the individual gardener feeling relaxed on a Sunday. The act of public stewardship impacts the entire neighborhood by addressing a psychological phenomenon known as plant blindness.
Plant blindness, that is such a brilliant term. It essentially means we treat the natural world as green wallpaper, right?
Yes. From an evolutionary psychology perspective, the human brain is wired to notice movement, novelty, and potential threats.
Right, survival instinct.
We scan for fast-moving animals, cars running red lights, other humans approaching us on the sidewalk. Our brains have a finite amount of processing power, so we naturally automatically filter out static, non-threatening background objects.
And unfortunately, in the urban environment, plants are relegated to that static background.
Exactly. We literally don't see them. To a person walking down the street looking at their phone, a tree isn't a complex living organism. It's just a green pole they have to walk around. A shrub is just a green blob. We are totally blind to the flora, to the species diversity, to the immense ecological value happening right next to us.
But the act of citizen stewardship violently breaks that blindness.
It does.
How does it break it?
Think about the visual disruption. A neighborhood is entirely gray, concrete, and brown, neglected dirt. It's static. It's boring. Then one day you walk by and see your neighbor physically down on their hands and knees, digging in the street tree bed.
Right, that human movement catches your eye.
It does. You stop and look. The next week, you walk by, and where there was only gray dirt, there's suddenly a bright, vibrant splash of purple lavender or yellow columbine.
It interrupts the visual monotony of the concrete.
Exactly. It forces the pedestrian to notice nature. They see the bees hovering around the flowers. They recognize the physical effort of the steward. By curating that tiny space, the steward makes nature legible to the rest of the community. It deepens the neighborhood's overall nature connectedness.
And I imagine there's a cascading effect there.
Oh, massive.
Once you start noticing the lavender on your corner and you realize it's alive and actually serving a purpose, you probably become a bit more receptive to larger environmental arguments, which is exactly what policymakers are hoping for, right? The paper mentions that this hyperlocal act of planting a flower ties directly into massive continental policy goals.
It does. The researchers explicitly link these citizen actions to top-tier policy initiatives. For example, the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 is actively pushing cities to develop comprehensive urban nature plans. They are finally recognizing that we cannot save global biodiversity just by drawing fences around distant national parks. We have to regreen the places where people actually live and work. The German Urban Nature Master Plan similarly mandates increasing both the quantity and the quality of natural biodiverse spaces directly within city limits.
But historically, when we hear about master plans and biodiversity strategies, we think of massive top-down bureaucracy.
Right.
We think of a city council voting to spend $50 million to bulldoze a derelict block and construct a highly engineered artificial park over the course of 10 years.
And those macro-level, top-down infrastructure projects are absolutely necessary. But the authors of this study conclude by framing citizen stewardship as a vital complementary force. They call it planetary health in action.
Planetary health in action.
Yes, what the Freiburg data proves is that massive, effective ecological transformation doesn't only have to come from top-down spending. It can quite literally grow from the grassroots.
It's an incredibly cheap, highly scalable solution.
Exactly. Empowering ordinary citizens to care for a few square feet of public land achieves measurable, statistically significant ecological and psychological benefits. It costs the municipality almost nothing compared to building a massive park, yet it weaves a resilient, biodiverse network right through the heart of the most heavily paved areas.
It is the ultimate localized expression of think globally, act locally.
It really is.
Well, we have covered an incredible amount of ground today, and I think it's time we pull all these threads together.
Sounds good.
Let's summarize the journey we've been on. We started by looking at a tiny, often ignored patch of dry, compacted dirt on the sidewalk. And through the rigorous lens of this Freiburg study, we peeled back the layers to discover an entire hidden world.
Yeah.
We saw how controlling for variables like tree trunk size and concrete density allowed researchers to mathematically prove that human care acts as a 1.6 times multiplier for biodiversity. We learned the actual mechanics of how a trowel loosening the soil changes water percolation, creating a welcoming landing pad for native ruderal seeds blown on the wind.
We also explored the complex reality of novel ecosystems, understanding that in the extreme environment of the Anthropocene, tough, non-native species often provide the critical architecture that allows an urban ecosystem to function at all.
Right, the botanical dinner party where everyone is welcome as long as they can survive the heat.
Exactly.
We zoomed out to understand how MacArthur and Wilson's 1960s theory of island biogeography maps perfectly onto the street, turning isolated tree beds into vital stepping stones for pollinators. We unpacked the sociological weight of the luxury and legacy effects, seeing how human wealth and history dictate the very seeds that sprout from the ground.
And ultimately, we learned how the simple act of planting a flower can cure the psychological epidemic of plant blindness, turning pedestrians back into active participants in planetary health.
It fundamentally reframes how you look at the urban environment. It changes the concrete from a permanent, sterile barrier into a canvas that is constantly waiting to be interrupted.
It absolutely does.
So, my challenge to you, the listener, the next time you walk out your front door, I want you to actively break your plant blindness. Look down at the streaked tree beds on your block.
Look closely at them.
Are they empty? Are they just hardened, hydrophobic dirt littered with discarded coffee cups? Because if they are, ask yourself, could you grab a trowel, loosen that soil, and be the one to turn that barren patch into a vibrant stepping stone for your local ecosystem?
And as you ponder picking up that trowel, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought that hovers just at the edges of this incredible research.
Oh, I like a provocative thought. Let's hear it.
We have spent this entire hour talking about the vascular plants, the leaves, the flowers, the stems we can see above the surface. We talked about how human hands are drastically altering that visible biodiversity. But consider this. If we are changing the surface ecology this radically just by digging in the topsoil, what entirely new, unseen ecosystems are we accidentally engineering in the dark? What vast fungal networks, complex soil microbiomes, and subterranean insect communities are adapting, evolving, and thriving just inches beneath the concrete, feeding off the roots we planted?
A whole unexplored universe operating silently beneath the pavement. That is a truly wild thought to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking closely at the details hidden in the dirt, and we will see you next time.
This knowledge is a tool, really. A tool for seeing your city differently, and potentially for helping to change it.
It's been a really insightful deep dive, I think. This document provides such a vital framework, especially for projects like the Feminist Park Project that are trying to build something fundamentally different. It shows just how interlinked urban design and social justice are.
It really does. But it also shows the scale of the challenge, right? It requires sustained effort, real commitment, and a genuine willingness to shift power dynamics in how cities get made and managed.
Definitely. It makes you think about how we ensure those voices, the ones that have been excluded, are actually heard and centered.
There's another quote from Sarah Ahmed that feels relevant here.
Go on.
She says, "If you have to shout to be heard, you are heard as shouting."
That's powerful.
It makes you ponder, doesn't it? How can the design of public space itself work differently? How can it amplify the voices of those who've been historically silenced, ensuring their needs are met without them having to shout just to be noticed?
How can design itself listen? That's a really provocative thought to end
A
on.
lot to think about.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.